Hey, my name's Matt Davis,
And I am Noe Rivera.
and we've started a ministry. It's called Pastoral Transitions. And what we want to talk to you about today is what happens beyond the pulpit, what happens to ministry leaders, people who are in ministry positions after they've left them, and what becomes of them. So, how do we actually care for pastors and their mental health during their own ministry transitions? And really, the picture that we want to paint for you is picture this on ramp of what happens when we bring somebody into ministry and they are welcomed. It feels like we picture this castle scene, right?
Mhm.
And the gates are open and the flags are furled, the birds are singing, and everybody welcomes them. And we basically will take, like, it's almost like we take a sword and we say, I now dub thee pastor. There's rejoicing in the kingdom and everything
Yep.
feels really, really great. But it doesn't stay like that on the way out. It's a different kind of exit, right?
Yeah, it's almost like the opposite experience. You go from feeling loved and wanted and belonging, and then on your way out, sometimes it feels cold and different, and that you're not as important even. And you really can start questioning a lot. Why does this not feel like my entry? This is almost feeling like a sad exit because often it is. And you go from this just burgeoning castle to this ice cold fortress. And what should be something that could actually be the same type of experience turns into a very opposite and oftentimes lonely and dark and difficult season.
Yeah, and so we want to just put out there, this is a paradigm shift. There's a different way, and we actually believe that we can do this better. And rather than this castle motif, what if transition looked a little bit more like a well-tended garden? That sometimes there is transplanting that takes place, but we actually bring it. Sometimes you have to lift up the vines and get them off the ground. Sometimes we have to expose something to more sunlight. Sometimes it needs more water. And so, what does that look like? And so what we care about is when you have to let a pastor or ministry leader go, there's incredible potential for hurt, for misunderstanding, and really it rises and falls exponentially depending on how leadership manages that situation. So we want to give just some clear indicators and maybe a pathway to be able to go through. How do we do these transitions and do them well? But how does a pastoral transition begin, right?
Yeah, it can happen in numerous ways. We took the concept of a Johari window, and basically, most transitions for pastors could either be known to the leadership or perhaps unknown to the leadership. And sometimes they're known to the pastor, and other times they're not known to the pastor. I think one of the most oftentimes experiences of a transition is when the pastor is often blindsided and is blind to them. They don't know that this is happening, but the leadership does. And so this is where we can genuinely come in and help people because this is where oftentimes the hurt happens. And pastors and their families can go through a lot of difficulty in this portion of the Johari window.
Yeah, and so we hear from a lot of people, and they'll say, as we're working with people who are coming out of their positions, they say, "I had no idea it was coming. We've poured ourselves into this community for so long, and like out of nowhere, it seemed to
Well,
happen."
and let's not forget too, for the leadership of churches, sometimes they know they're about to let someone go, and it's
Mm.
hard on them as well, um, because they don't want to hurt the pastor oftentimes, or their family, but they don't know how to handle it perhaps in the best way. And we could come alongside the leadership as well.
Yeah. So when we talk about leadership and when we talk to leaders, we're really trying to come alongside them. They are wanting to do the right thing, but oftentimes just need a little bit of help and direction. And so, what are some of those challenges that are facing leadership? What's at stake? What are those challenges that are before us when we're making a decision? And these decisions could be everything from just poor performance to it's just not a fit anymore. To there's just some characterological things or even just some hidden sins that we have to bring up and we have to address. And so, whatever the transition is, however that starts, it's important how we deal with that. And so, if we do this poorly, everybody's going to look and they're going to say, "Oh, this is not going poorly." The church is watching, right? And they see that, but also there can be a loss of trust. We have our leadership that is there and they are trying to guide, but you do something wrong. No matter what's happened, people are looking at pastors who are coming out and they say, that's the person that married us. That was the person who was there in the hospital and performed the memorial service. They baptized my kids. There is a connection. And so when we just kick people to the curb, and don't care for them, then there's a loss of trust. But so much so that people could even rise up, take their torches and say, we're out of here.
Yep.
And if they don't do that loudly, they'll do it quietly and they just leave. And we don't even know that they're doing that, which also impacts giving financially. And so that actually has a big impact on really the life and the ongoing potential for the church and for that community. And this is a quote from a guy named John Steger, and this is actually from the secular world, but I think we need to take a look at this. And he says, how you treat people on their way out the door does not go unnoticed by the rest of the organization. And without getting into my whole story, I am a pastor who came out of ministry. And even though we wanted to go really well, it was a struggle. It was a hard transition for really all of us. And I remember somebody from the congregation coming up to me a couple months afterwards and said, Pastor, I don't know what you did, but I'm glad that the leadership doesn't know all the things that I've done, because they would have kicked me out a long time ago. And it was a moment where I realized, like, they notice, the people are watching and they see what's going on. So those are some of the challenges that leadership deals with. But we really want to get into what happens in that church hurt and those pastors and their families, their spouses, the kids. What are some of the things that are at stake when they're in that transition season?
Yeah, there's a lot at stake. Myself, I am a child of pastors, and I went through multiple transitions that my parents went through, and the impacts aren't just in the moment. The impacts can stay with you for weeks, months, years, a lifetime. Um, there's several points we want to touch on. Is there's actually a potential for trauma during this time. It can have such a big impact on people when they are transitioning out from the pastors and their families, that they are in a shock phase. And typically in the first few weeks, first few months for pastors, there can be this disorientation, this dysregulation of, wait a minute, my whole structure, my whole system, my whole way of life is disrupted. And that could be traumatic to the system, to the body. It can impact sleep. It can impact daily habits. It can really start to impact how a family operates and how a pastor operates. There's also, this is a well-known fact, that many pastors feel lonely, and they go through isolation from the beginning of their pastoring all the way through. Pastors can feel lonely, but think about when a pastor leaves that position.
Right.
Talk about a moment of even more loneliness. And what could have been a very public type presence with many people in a congregation, and then all of a sudden they are no longer in that position, and it can turn into isolation. And loneliness and isolation, when you put those things together, it can lead to things like depression and anxiety or addictions, and just an extreme disruption of the heart. There's oftentimes, it said, there's a proverb that says, when you're going to war, to have many counselors, and don't just go to war, but have many people speaking into your lives. When a pastor transitions out, they often don't have anyone. And if they do have people, they're even wondering, can I trust this person now? They're part of my community. And you can be in this phase of, how do I do this with other people around me? And we can get very isolated in this season. And so it's important that this is a moment, especially for counselors, to come alongside and say, hey, you're not alone. There's an image I want to give of, think about a young 7-year-old boy who has just been left by his friends, and he's hurt because at school they left him, and he comes home and he sits in his room and he's all by himself in his room. And what if no one comes in and gives him a hug and says, hey, I'll be with you in this. We're going to get through this together. We'll help you make new friends. We as adults sometimes have these child moments inside of us, and pastors can actually have these moments inside of them where they are sitting in a room alone and they feel just like that young boy of, who do I turn to? What do I do? How can I make my life better even from this moment on? And so there is an element where this is where someone's mental health and pastor's mental health, the wives, the husbands, the children, if there's grandparents involved,
Mm.
whoever's involved in that transition, we don't want them to sit in the room alone. We want them to have help. And this is where counselors can come in. And this is where not only counselors, but you need numerous supports. We need people checking in on us. We need to have family and friends that are checking in on us. But the reason why I love counselors checking in on them is counselors can see the blind spots
Yeah.
that pastors can't oftentimes and say, hey, you mentioned sleep. You're having a difficulty with this. Let's talk more about this. Or I see that your body seems just real uncomfortable. You seem to come into our sessions and you're shaking your leg, or you're kind of always tense, or you're leaning forward, or every session you come in and you're crying. A counselor can actually notice these things and help a pastor work through this in a very, hopefully, non-shaming environment that they don't have to perform, they don't have to be on in any kind of way.
Mm.
And that's the beauty of having counseling.
Yeah. There's really a lot that goes on, but one of these pictures that we like to share and talk about is the buffalo. And there's a difference between cows and buffaloes, right? This is the interesting thing: is when a storm comes, cows will run away from the storm, and buffaloes charge into the storm. And it's really it's almost the opposite of what our first reaction would be. We want to go and hide, but it's true that buffalo will run into the storm, and what they find is that some of the best vegetation is stirred up when the wind is hitting and the rain is coming. And so they also realize, though, that when we go head first into the storm, that we get through it faster. We come out the other end, and we become the kind of people, if we live lives like a buffalo, that we become the kind of people who are not afraid of the storm. And so we really love to be able to take people who are facing a storm that has come upon them, whether they've created the storm themselves. And what does that look like to say the storm's coming, whether you like it or not, but how do we actually do this and go through it together, right? And so really, like, we get to address this, and it's the trauma and it's the loneliness, but we often, like, they're getting hit from all sides, right? They're trying to find employment. They oftentimes will find out that they don't actually have, most churches don't pay into unemployment benefits, which leads to this financial panic. And they're wondering, like, how long is my financial runway and what am I going to do? And really, even, I'm sure that you've dealt with quite a few that have just started to question their relationship with Jesus, right? If the people of God have left me, has God left me as well, right?
Completely. Yeah. And pastors oftentimes, I think, don't know if they have that liberty to share about their own faith journey in a very honest way. And then they have to ask the second question: if I do feel that liberty, who can I share with?
Yeah.
And it's important for them to be able to have space to walk through their faith questions and to walk through the difficulties with God, of God, why is this happening? Did you abandon me? And just like a lot of pastors might preach to their people and give them permission to walk through pain. This is where we now want to come in as counselors and say, hey, you have permission. You have permission to go through your pain, because we want you to come out the other side of this. But first, you kind of need to grant that permission. So even listening to this today, if you are going through transition, or you know someone going through transition, it could be a powerful moment to actually grant someone permission and say, don't feel like you need to hide this. We can go through this. And we pray and we ask God so that you can experience that permission granted within yourself. You have permission to go through this.
And really what that season looks like is there's a movement, and really it's the story of the Psalms. If you read the Psalms, they kind of tell the story of our lives, right? There's these Psalms of orientation to be in the presence of God. And then suddenly we have these Psalms that are, why do you hide your face from me? And we find ourselves without warning, oftentimes in the season of disorientation. And it's the wilderness season, right? We see this as the Israelites are exiting, coming out of Egypt. And now for 40 years, the hard part about being in disorientation in the wilderness is you don't want to be there where you're at. You either want to go back to Egypt or just get me to the promised land, but you don't know which one is closer. And so that season of disorientation is really hard. And what we want to do is we want to just go back to how it was. And the hard part is realizing in the midst of that we can't go back to how things used to be. but that we trust that God in the season is bringing us to what we call a new normal. It's a reorientation. And so this is where, if all of that is a setup for the problem, we want to be able to give you a solution. And this has been our heart's journey. When I had girls breaking up with me in high school, I was feeling a little devastated, and sometimes I'd try to go back to the girls so I could somehow be healed. And I remember my mom saying to high school Matt, she said, "The one who broke your heart is likely not the one who can heal it." Sage, wise words from my mother.
Yes.
But this is what we get to do in our ministries. We get to walk with outgoing pastors on behalf of the church leadership. If you are part of a ministry and you've let somebody go and you want to be able to help them, it might not actually be the best time or season for them to do that. So what does that actually look like? We get to work with ministry leaders who are coming out, departing leaders, in three areas: career, coaching, and counseling. The question is, what do I do with a seminary degree and 20 years behind the pulpit? And how am I
Hmm.
gonna be at Home Depot or Starbucks? And how does that, I
Hmm.
don't have a resume. Well, how do I actually leverage my experience? And does any of that transition into the marketplace? Am I even going into ministry or something else? So we get to walk through career coaching. We have a suite of assessments. We help with things like LinkedIn and really interview skills, all of those type of things. So we work, and we have another partner named Bill, who started, really, he's the genesis of all of this, but is an expert in this space as a career coach in the marketplace for more than 35 years. So we work with outgoing leaders in the career space, and then we also come alongside in the coaching area. So that pastoral coaching, somebody who's been through it, gone through it, and lived to tell about it, just asking questions, more spiritual formation. Where's the Lord at for you in this season? But also financial coaching. How are you doing financially? What are the guardrails? What do we need to do? And how long do we have to do it? What's your severance like? And so we work with them. And then even some life and leadership coaching. Maybe there were some of those blind spots that you were talking about earlier. And maybe everybody else sees it and you don't. And so let's do some 360-degree reviews, and let's look at your life, and let's build up that leadership so that you're entering into that next phase, that next season, with some strength. But then we also help with the counseling season.
Yeah, and the counseling is vital for numerous ways. We like we were talking about earlier. Don't go through this alone. We want to have you not be in a room, isolated in your life, in your heart, all alone. You need to have someone that comes alongside you. Um, I think about the Emmaus Road, and remember when they were walking on the road,
Mm,
and they didn't know that Christ was walking with them, but their hearts were burning inside of them.
mm,
And in some ways, in one of your deepest, darkest moments in life, a counselor can somehow allow for the burning of God, the burning of Christ to still permeate in a season where it seems like hope is lost and darkness is covering your eyes. And you can make it through that road. You can get to the other side.
mm,
And we hope that someone through counseling is able to come out of the other side and say, I think I actually felt God still somehow through this, and there's hope again, and there's renewal again. Another thing that's powerful about counseling, I like to call this the billboard moment, a transition moment. So when you're driving home from work, let's say you're driving into the office and you have an office, and then you're driving back home. It's actually here's a tip. It's wise about halfway through your trip home to pick a place on the highway. Let's just say it's a billboard, and say, from my work location all the way up to that billboard, I get to think about work. I get to process work. I get to be angry in my head. I get to go through whatever I need to go through in my head. But once I hit that billboard,
mm,
that's when I transition to thinking about how I'm going to show up at home.
mm,
How I'm going to think about a spouse, my children, grocery run, whatever it is. I've got to transition. There needs to be a transition moment. There has to be a billboard moment,
mm,
because if not, you're at home, but are you really home? No, you're still at work. And so that's where, excuse me, where counseling can actually come in, is to say, excuse me, there's actually a powerful moment of counseling that can be a billboard moment for you, that you need someone to come alongside and be able to say, you know what, I was able to get through this because I had a support system that helped be a billboard moment for me in my life in this transition, and we got through it together.
So, what does that look like when we go through this? First, we work with the leaders who are considering this transition or termination. We walk through that process and how you communicate that, and then we transition into working with the pastors there. But how we say goodbye matters, right?
Completely matters.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's when someone comes into your home, hopefully, you greet them with a handshake, with a hello, because it's your home. You're entering into someone's home. But when they leave, if you don't say goodbye or you don't give them a hug, it can feel very disorienting. Like, wait a minute, was that even worth it? That whole stay in that home? Was that welcoming? I thought it was welcoming, but now that I'm leaving, it feels actually like I wasn't welcoming, or I wasn't welcomed. And so you start to really question that whole entire experience. And pastors often will, question the whole entire experience based upon the exit. And so that's where we want to make sure that, hey, just as you came into this, the congregation oftentimes, I think, there's oftentimes a desire even to look through the mess of things and to say, we still want to bless you. And it's real important, I think, for the unity of the body and the unity of our own hearts and community, for Christians to rise to this place of, no matter how this is ending, we can still do this well.
Yeah.
And as Christians, we're called, I think, to do this well. And I think Scripture calls us to not only love one another and to love our enemies, but we can do it in the beginning and the end.
Yeah. And when we do that, we're actually living out the Great Commission, right? Jesus tells us to go out and make disciples, to grow the church. But when we do this poorly, we're actually dividing. And so that's part of our mission statement, is to multiply, not divide. We have the wristbands as a reminder for us, but we want to restore the church's original mission statement to be able to grow the church and not divide it. And when we're doing that, we're living out a commandment that Jesus gave us.
Yeah, a new commandment I give to you, that you love one another just as I have loved you, and you also are to love one another. By this, all people will know that you are my disciples, if you have love for one another. Going back to our original beginning, the coming in can feel a lot like a royalty and a crowning moment. The way out, it's going to be difficult sometimes. But what if it felt diffically good? I think I make up a little word there. Diffically good.
Yeah,
Is that possible?
I've never heard that word before, but I understand what you're saying.
Yeah,
It's good.
it can still be difficult, but there can be goodness in that, the leaving, and that's what we wanted to do.
Yeah. Just two resources that we'd love to be able to just share. Number one, we have a podcast. It's called Life After Ministry. And we say that if your last day in ministry is day 0, what happens on day 1? And we ask and have conversations with lots of people who've lived to tell about it. And we get to journey through, what did you do on that first day to rebuild your life? What counseling did you get? How did you figure out what your job was going to be? And what are you doing now? And we get to share these stories of hope. Yes, there was that hard season, but I made it through. And this is where God has brought me. And God is faithful has really been the theme of all of these stories.
Yeah. So we'd love to invite you to continue to connect with us.
Yep.
You can go to my email, noe@pastoraltransitions.com or matt@pastoraltransitions.com. Here's our QR code. You can go to our website, pastoraltransitions.com. Love to hear from you in whatever stage you are in, or if you know of someone. Again, we don't want people to go through this alone, because together we're better than alone.
Hey, thanks for listening. Bless you.